Okay. Okay, everybody. Hi, thank you so much for being here for this presentation. I hope we got some good information out of it. And again, throw those questions in the chat. We'll be keeping an eye on that. And here we go. So again, thank you for joining me for my webinar on stress. And before we begin, I do want to verbalize that this is just an informational and educational presentation. It doesn't supersede any prescribed interventions or treatments by your healthcare team. Before ever making any changes, please consult with your healthcare provider. And with that said, we will begin. So stress is something we all experience, and it's something that we talk a lot about, but not very constructively, or at least we don't take very constructive or resolute steps towards addressing the stress and the stress in our lives. We know it's bad, and we know we should be doing things to alleviate the stress, but even the thought of that seems stressful. So my goal today with this webinar is to discuss the significant effects of stress and then provide some tools and ideas to begin to address that stress. Okay. So I'm going to start off here and define some terms. The first term I want to review is homeostasis, and simply put, it is a state of balance. And so when our bodies are in homeostasis, all of our body systems are working properly. They're complementing each other and they're helping each other perform the tasks they need to do to help keep us alive and healthy. So for all intents and purposes, we are at harmony, psychologically speaking. Stress then is something that pulls us out of that homeostasis. And what I want to impart to you guys is that stress is not only a psychological thing that we feel, but is a thing that actually is causing physiological reactions within our body. So it's going to affect our general health and our physical health. So with all this talk about stress, what exactly is stress? So there are a lot of definitions for stress, because stress can mean a host of different things when we discuss it in relation to our bodies, and also when we think about all the different disciplines with science. Today, our main focus will be psychological stress, which is why I'm sure a lot of you guys jumped on this webinar. But we will need to understand our body's physiological response when exposed to a stressor in order to fully understand how our psychological stress then moves to impact our physical health. So again, with all those definitions, I kind of narrowed it down through some research, and I summarized it as our body's natural reaction to stressors. And I chose the term natural because the stress reaction is innate. It's our body skillfully leaving homeostasis, and it's boosting our normal functioning so that we can face a stressor appropriately and effectively. Oh, no, here we go. Okay, sorry, guys. So we have our stress, right? Our body's natural reaction to stressors. And stressors, that is going to be something that activates our physiological response. And it's going to be something that is going to directly challenge our homeostasis. With our stressors, we can have internal stressors, so we can have psychological and emotional stressors. But then we can also have external stressors for things like physical touch or extreme temperature or natural disaster. Some common factors, or excuse me, some common stressors that we might see in our daily lives are relational. So like our relationships, our romantic relationships, our relationships with our family or our friends. Other stressors might include work or fear of change or fear of the unknown. And then also those unexpected changes to our daily routines. Other stressors can include finances, so our money-related stress, our health, and not only just our personal health, but the health of our family members and our friends. Social rejection can be another stressor, and this might be especially significant when we are looking at our school age population, our adolescents, and then those in early adulthood. Exposure to violence is a big one. So think about people that are experiencing war or just unsafe home environments. Negative self-talk, right? So we are our own worst critics. So things that are happening within us that we are telling ourselves is going to be a stressor. That lack of control is also going to be a stressor. And then high or unrealistic expectations, right? Sometimes we expect so much of ourselves, and sometimes those expectations are just a little too high, or maybe they're just unrealistic for the situation. That again is going to add to our stress. So this list that I've listed out is not exhaustive. Stressors can be many different things. And one thing that I do want to point out is that while one thing might be a stressor to one person, another person might not find that stressful, and that's okay. But we will talk a lot more about that later in the presentation. So again, remember that stress is our natural response to a stressor. So the problem does not lie in the response, so the stress response itself, but the amount and the duration of those stressors. In other words, how long are we being activated? We can even see stressors compound on each other as well. So we might, for example, feel stress at the loss of a family member. So we might be thinking, okay, is my role changing? What are my new demands? What kind of support do I have? And in the hustle and bustle of processing those events and those inevitable changes, you may choose to forego a healthy lifestyle because who has time for that, right? But because of this, your health may begin to suffer, your physical and your mental health, which then leads to new problems and then new stressors and so on and so forth. So it's when those stressors are long lasting or compounding that we begin to see those detrimental effects of stress. So what do the effects of stress look like? Okay, so we have our natural stress response, and it's meant to protect us. So if we have a bee, this little angry bee here, what do? Do we stand and swat at it? Or do we run away with flapping arms and screeching? In other words, are we going to fight or are we going to flight? And I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with this phrase, but there's so much more going on with our body, physiologically speaking, than just the cognitive decision of our fighting or our fleeing. What our body is physiologically doing is activating what is called our sympathetic nervous system. So when our sympathetic nervous system is activated, hormones are released and fall on different receptors in our body's cell, which cause varying reactions that are designed to help our survival and to help us adapt quickly to the situation. So as you guys can see here, some of those changes include pupil dilation, and that's going to help us so we can see more. It's going to widen our visual field. We can see our muscles tense, and this is going to they're going to tense and contract, and this is going to help us get ready to fight or to run away quickly. We will see our heart accelerate, our heart rate accelerate. So this happens, and we also have our blood vessels constrict. And this in tandem is going to help increase blood flow to vital organs. So things like our heart and our brain, so we can really think through this situation. Our body is also going to pull from energy stores within our body. It's going to increase our lipid counts, so the fat in our bodies, and it's also going to help raise our blood glucose, so our blood sugar. So that way we have enough energy to fight or to run away. So thinking about these reactions, these natural reactions, these normal reactions that are meant to help us survive, there are things that are going to happen in our body. And the activation of our sympathetic nervous system, can manifest in these ways. We might notice that we have a headache. We might notice that our jaw is clenched, or we have a lot of tension in our neck or shoulders. We might have dry mouth. We might experience palpitations, right, from our heart pounding or racing. We might notice fast breathing. We might notice hyperventilating, or we might notice that, gosh, it just feels a little harder to catch my breath. We'll notice sweating, especially in our hands and on our head, right? Those are kind of those big areas of sweating. And then we'll have bladder relaxation. So I'm sure we've all experienced that nervous pee feeling, right? You've gone to the bathroom and you know you're fine, but something just makes you feel like, gosh, I gotta go again, right? And that is our sympathetic nervous system really working. So again, I really want to pound on this fact that this physiological response is a good response. It's positive because it is helping us address this specific moment with this specific stressor and helping us survive it. So whether that's fighting or fleeing. But once we survive, so we have conquered the bee, our body will relax and it will return to homeostasis. And then our acute stress response or our fight or flight response will relax. But what if we don't conquer the stressor? Right? So let's talk about that compounding stress. So let's say the bee chases after us. And as we're running away, we step on a dog's tail. And now the dog is mad and the dog's going to start running after us and trying to bite us. And we're running, and then we trip over a rock and we hurt our knees and we hit our head. Right? So all of those things are going to start compounding, and all of those different things are now becoming new stressors. And we can start to see those negative outcomes related to our health arise. So with chronic or prolonged stress, our sympathetic nervous system is going to stay activated. So it's going to keep our muscles tense. It's going to keep our heart beating fast and our blood vessels constricted. And so this means a lot of different things for our bodies. So before we jump into this next portion of the presentation, I do want to caution us all, and just remind us that feeling stress is normal, and having stress or having even chronic stress doesn't automatically create poor health outcomes. Again, it's just a symptom, and it may predispose you to having poor health outcomes, increase our susceptibility to illness, or exacerbate pre-existing conditions. So let's take a look at how our different body systems can be affected by chronic stress. So first, our cardiovascular system. Talked a little about this, right? Our heart's going to speed up. And so if we are constantly activated, we're going to be at increased risk for developing heart disease, and we'll have reduced heart health just because our heart is working so hard to do its normal stuff, right? It's forcefully contracting and it's at a higher rate and for an extended period of time. So it's going to get tired. We might notice that we have increased risk of developing hypertension, or our hypertension gets worse. And then we also can see increased risk of heart attack or stroke. Our GI system, so our gastrointestinal system, also takes a few hits. Excuse me. We can see worsening of pre-existing conditions like Crohn's disease or IBS, ulcerative colitis, GERD, all of those fun digestive illnesses. But we can also see appetite changes, right? We can start eating too much or too little. We can see bowel pattern changes, so constipation or relieving ourselves too much. We can start to see stomach ulcers, and then nausea and vomiting is also a common symptom with chronic stress. With our musculoskeletal system, muscle tension is probably the most noticeable change when we talk about that sympathetic nervous response. And this tension can lead to new or increased frequency of tension headaches, back pain, and then jaw pain, right? Because we're clenching a lot of the times. It's also can put us at greater risk for injury, right? Because everything's activated and contracted more often, and we're not relaxed and loose. We can also actually begin to see loss of bone density, which is again going to put us at greater risk for injury, right? If our bones aren't as dense, we're going to be at high risk for getting fractures or different injuries. But we can also see an increased risk of developing osteoporosis. Another piece that might be affected is our joints. So arthritis symptoms might be aggravated or worsened. With our immune system, there are variable effects with our immune system. There's lots of studies being conducted constantly to fully understand the consequence of chronic stress on our immune system. But it's at least agreed upon that experiencing chronic stressors and stress response can lead to deficient immunity, which is then going to put us at a greater risk for becoming ill. We can also see generalized systemic inflammation, which consequently affects our entire bodies or all of our body systems, increasing the likelihood that we may experience negative health outcomes. And then our central nervous system is obviously affected by chronic stress, but I want most specifically to focus on our cognition and our memory. So cognition is just our mental processes. So our thinking and our learning and our ability to use judgment, that's our cognition. And when we're exposed to stressors for a prolonged time, we can begin to see some cognitive impairments or decreased cognitive function. We might notice that our memory isn't as sharp as it used to be, or our focus or our organizational skills are lacking. We might also notice a worsening of mental health challenges and disorders, or perhaps the emergence of those. These changes to our memory and cognition can then lead to behavioral changes as well. So kind of a lot to unpack with that central nervous system, and lots of different avenues it can take. So these 5 systems right here are the ones that kind of see the largest impact from experiencing chronic stress, but really all of our body systems are being affected. And so some other things that we might see when we are exposed to chronic stress is exacerbation of existing respiratory illnesses, so things like asthma. We might see skin changes, so an increase in acne or an emergence of acne, rashes, worsening of illnesses like psoriasis or eczema. And then we can even begin to see hair loss, right? That stress hair loss. Excuse me. Sorry, guys, I'm getting over COVID, so a little coffee there. Excuse me. We can also see menstrual changes or sexual dysfunction, so changes to our reproductive systems. We can see an aggravation of type 2 diabetes or an emergence, as well as increased blood cholesterol. And remember, that's happening because when our body is, when our body is reacting, it's increasing our fat and our sugar in our blood, so that way our body has more energy. We can also notice sleep pattern changes and then fatigue, and those are probably pretty significant because I feel like most of the time sleep is going to be affected when we're experiencing chronic stress. So as we can see, stress in large doses and extended duration is quite a doozy, but something that can cause just as much distress to our bodies are our coping strategies that we choose. So in other words, the things that we do to help alleviate or numb our stress. So how we choose to cope with stress can have just as much of an impact on our health outcomes as the chronic activation of our stress response. In an article that I found published in Bioessays, the group of authors writes, "Stress is not what happens to you, but how you react to it." So let's think about it. When we're feeling stressed or overwhelmed, what are some actions that we typically take? Most of the time, I find that we reach for fixes for the moment, right? We grab comfort foods, which are generally poor in nutritional profile. We may choose to overindulge in alcohol or drugs or tobacco. We may choose to forego an active lifestyle in place of a sedentary one because we just don't have any energy at all, or our energy is in other places. We may also practice things like self-neglect or avoidance. And that's not just avoiding the stressor, but starting to avoid a lot of other things in our life as well. Again, with our sleeping too much or sleeping too little, or participating in risky behaviors. So this is not an exhaustive list of coping strategies that can result in poor health outcomes, but these are just a few of those common examples. So you may find yourself sitting here thinking, well, then tell me what I need to do, right? When we move to address stress, we need to have self-awareness and to be mindful of what our stressor is. We need to be mindful of how our mind and our body is reacting to the stressor. And then we have to try to decide what might be the healthiest and most effective way of addressing it. Sorry, guys. Okay. So our first step, so step one is going to be identifying our stressor. And this is important because you may think that one thing is stressing you out. So one thing is acting as that stressor, but actually it might be a completely different thing. The thing you think you're stressing about might just be an added bonus of the thing you're actually stressing about. Another important reason to identify your stressor is because, are you in denial? Have you ever had family or friends say, you're being snappy, or what's up? Something seems wrong. Or maybe they blatantly say, oh my gosh, you're stressed, stop, right? And you reply, no, I'm not. I'm fine. I'm not being snappy, right? So we're kind of in denial that we are experiencing that stress. So step one, identifying our stressor is so, so important because we have to identify that we are indeed stressed. And then two, something that's going to help with that is identifying our signs and our symptoms. So signs and symptoms of stress are going to include physical and psychological parts because our sympathetic nervous system is affecting both of those. So looking at this list, I know we've mentioned most, if not all, of these signs and symptoms throughout the presentation so far. But I think being very aware of these warning signs, so these signs and symptoms, not only helps us to create the most effective coping strategies, but also allows us to utilize them sooner rather than later. So some physical signs that you might notice if you're experiencing stress, right? We talked about headache. You might notice that you feel dizzy or lightheaded or just kind of off, right? Kind of fuzzy. You might notice an upset stomach or nausea. You might notice palpitations, or you just feel like your heart is just racing. You might notice muscle tension, and again, those tension headaches or tight jaw or back pain. We might notice pain in our body, so things just seem to feel achy or just not right, or maybe we have a pre-existing condition and it seems to just be feeling worse. We might feel shaky, and then we might notice changes in our breathing, so breathing super fast or like we're not breathing fully. Some behavioral changes, that signs and symptoms that we can see. Restlessness, so if you just have a difficult time sitting still, or just nothing's really satisfying in your attention, it's just kind of going from one thing to another. Emotional outbursts, so are you being snappy? Are you responding in anger? Are you irritated or short-tempered? Substance misuse, do you notice that, oh, I usually drink one glass of wine, but now I'm drinking 4 or 5. So that's kind of that sign that, okay, something might be going on with me. We might notice that we're less active, that we're eating too much or too little. We might notice that we're sleeping way too much or having difficulty sleeping. So kind of having some insomnia, or just you kind of fall asleep and then you wake up, then you fall asleep and you wake up. So very disrupted sleep. And then are you isolating? Are you noticing that you're pushing away from your friends and your family or activities that you want, that you usually like to enjoy? So emotional signs and symptoms, we can see difficulty concentrating or making decisions. And again, with that cognitive effect, right? We're just not thinking as clearly. We're not able to think about things as systematically. Are we noticing constant worries? We're just kind of constantly worrying about everything and not able to shut that down. Forgetfulness, again, with that cognition, right? Are we having difficulty making new memories? So, hey, honey, can you grab eggs and toast when you get off work today? We're gonna have breakfast for dinner. And you're like, oh yeah, of course, right? But you're so stressed, and then you get home and you're like, oh my gosh, I totally forgot about that, right? So just those little moments of forgetfulness. Are you finding lack of motivation? Or are you feeling overwhelmed, right? That's usually a really good sign. That's kind of a sign, I feel like, that we have gone a little too far, and we really need to work on addressing that stress, because if we're feeling overwhelmed, we know we're feeling stressed at that point. So being able to identify these signs and symptoms and being able to identify these stressors can be difficult sometimes. Sometimes it is difficult to have that self-awareness or that mindfulness, or even just that space to really sit down and reflect on that. So if you need help with identifying, am I stressed? What could be my stressors? There is this really great resource, and it is a stress screener through I think it's Mental Health Association. I didn't write that down, but this link here will take you to a screen, and you'll answer 16 questions, and they're varying from your lifestyle or to your habits. And then the result will let you know if you have stress and then what that level of stress is. But then it goes forward to offer you resources or tips to manage or cope with that stress. So a really awesome tool, and I scored really high. So, you know, I found it very helpful. But speaking of coping, that brings us to our next step. Right, so we've identified our stressor, we've identified our signs and symptoms, and now we're going to find our coping strategy and we're going to put it into practice. So there are a lot of strategies for stress. And when I compiled this list, I wanted to stay away from kind of the typical, like, oh, do yoga, be in nature. Those are super, super helpful. But we kind of hear those all the time. And so I wanted to compile a list that was a little more diverse and might fit with more lifestyles. So the first thing that I want to focus on here is being comfortable with managing acute stress. So are you stressed out because you're late for work and then there's traffic and you just keep hitting every red light and you're just building and building and building, right? So identify that and then try to utilize some of your coping strategies that we'll talk about as we go through to deal with that acute stress. Because if we're comfortable with managing that acute stress, we kind of build like a muscle memory. And so it makes it easier to put ourselves in a place, in a space where we can address big stressors in our lives. Something that I really liked growing up was practice makes permanent, right? And again, it's that muscle memory. It's making that permanent impression of, okay, this is how I'm going to deal with stress. Utilize helpful communication strategies. Communication is, without a doubt, one of the most important things for us as human beings in this world, in my opinion. And there's not enough good communication. But when we're talking about communication with helping with our stress, become comfortable communicating your feelings. There's a lot of different factors that can go into that, right? Traditionally, males are not able to really disclose those things because they're not seen as manly enough. Females might get, well, you're being hormonal, right? So all those negative things, we kind of have to push that aside and be comfortable with communicating our feelings and really be comfortable with communicating our feelings to a safe person. We also need to be comfortable asking for help, right? A lot of the times we're like, I can do it. I can do it. I can do it. No, I can do it, right? I feel like a lot of times parents or caregivers, they have that, no, I can do it. I can do it. I can do it. But it's okay to ask for help, and you need to become comfortable asking for help. And also on the flip side, be comfortable saying no. It's okay to say no, and it's okay to not be able to do everything that you're being asked to do, right? You're just one person, and there's only so much that you can do. Another tip, remove your negative self-talk. So don't shame yourself for finding something stressful or overwhelming. I find a lot of times in my personal life, I do this and it causes more stress. I'm like, well, so-and-so isn't stressed out by this. They seem to be just thriving. Why can't I do that? I should be able to do that. We have the same job. We have the same education. Why can't I do that? it's okay that I can't. It's okay that I might need extra help, right? So identifying that it's okay and not allowing yourself to feel shame for feeling stressed is so important. Another thing as well, right? Removing that negative self-talk of I can't do this, or life sucks, or this is just too much. I don't know how I'm going to continue to do this, right? We'll talk about reframing it in a few bullet points here, but kind of reframing those things of, okay, this is difficult now, but this is what I'm doing to make it better. And this is what I can do moving forward, right? So removing that negative self-talk. Giving yourself grace, right? The amount of times that we extend grace to other people, right? You're 2 minutes late to work, shoot, and you're stressing out about it, and you feel like you failed, and you feel like the world's falling apart, and you're going to get fired. And without taking a moment to think, gosh, would I extend grace to somebody for being 2 minutes late? Probably, right? And so trying to give yourself that grace. So grace that you would give to another person, give that back to yourself. Another tip, focus on what you can change and let go of what you cannot. And then remove those what ifs. So what if I don't do this? Or what if this happens? Right? That's just going to cause more stress. It's going to add more stressors, and it's going to activate us more. Another tip, fun-sized Snickers make for a little less stress. And what I mean by this is taking bite-sized chunks out of your day to address what you need to, and not addressing it all at once. It's so easy to take a look at everything and want to try to get it all together and perfect all at once. But sometimes you just need to take little bite-sized chunks, little fun-sized chunks, and conquer those things as you go forward. Organize yourself, right? Organization is difficult, especially if you're feeling overwhelmed and stressed, but it's something that's a tool that's really going to help you be in that space to be able to begin to work through your stressors. Schedule a self-care appointment and keep it like a doctor's appointment, right? We go to doctor's appointments, we go to dentist appointments. We have probably our hair appointments, or, workout appointments, things like that, right? Things that we really care about and we need to go do. But when we think about self-care, we go, well, that's kind of selfish. I don't have time to take a time out of my day to have a self-care appointment. But you are worth it and you deserve it. And it's one of those things that's really going to help with coping and managing with that stress. So on your self-care appointment, get a massage or take a hike, right? Go be out in nature. Just have a day for you. So maybe you just do grocery shopping and you clean and stuff, but maybe you're going to be completely by yourself and you're going to blast your music and you're going to take as much time as you want at the grocery store, maybe stop for a coffee, right? Just little things like that, just for you. Trying a new hobby is a great way to cope with stress as well. So if there's something that you've always wanted to do, go do it. There are so many community resources out there within your community, within your states, within your cities that are available to you. And so I encourage you guys to look for those and try to be a part of those. Another way that we can cope with stress is reframing our everyday. And sorry, guys, a pop-up came up. And what I mean by that is take a new approach to your daily life. So you have your daily chores, right? You have to go to work, you have to go shopping, you have to get the kids ready, or you have to care for somebody, or you have different responsibilities with different parts of your job. Take a new approach with that. So instead of saying, gosh, now I have to go grocery shopping, what's something that can make the grocery shopping fun? Are you able to go by yourself? Are you able to put in some headphones and jam out to some music? Are you able to set a chunk of time aside for that and just be like, I'm going to enjoy myself and not feel like I have to be in a rush? And then also, part of reframing is thinking, okay, how is this negative thing an opportunity for growth or for learning, right? So sometimes a negative thing is just a negative thing, and that's okay. And there's nothing we can do about it, right? We're human and we're going to experience negative things. But if we're really struggling with the outcome of that negative thing, we can try to reframe it and say, okay, what did I learn from this? What are some opportunities for growth? Some other ways to manage our stress, right? Be social. Again, one of those signs and symptoms is avoidance or isolating. And so being social is really helpful, especially when you just feel like you don't want to. Limit external stressors is another one. So, don't be so in tune with the news, right? I don't know if this is still a saying, but like the doom scrolling, right? Where you're just going through and you're seeing all the negative things, all the negative things, all the negative things. That's going to be an external stressor that's going to be adding to you. And it might not be something that you're actually stressing about because you're not the one in that situation, but it's still affecting some part of your subconscious, right? So limiting those external stressors is helpful. Journaling, right? So now we're kind of getting into those tips and tricks that are kind of always thrown at us when we're talking about stress. But journaling can be really helpful just to make your thoughts more concrete and to be able to have just a physical copy of what's going on in your mind. And sometimes it helps just to kind of get it all out, to see it, and it almost is releasing. Practicing mindfulness, and we can do this by, again, trying to take times for ourselves, but also like practicing like yoga or Tai Chi, kind of those relaxing exercises that help us just kind of center ourselves and then put us in a place where we're able to meditate on those things. So kind of goes into the next one, so relaxing, trying deep breathing exercises. If you're feeling stressed or overwhelmed and you notice that you're feeling all of these, this body anxiety, this body stress, really taking a moment and centering yourself and just focusing on your breathing is so helpful. And now there's so many apps out there that are geared towards helping with mental health, that there's even like the box breathing, and you can breathe with an app. And so kind of all of those tools. We talked about being in nature. Try progressive relaxation. And this is where you tense up one part of your body and then you relax it. And you just kind of go from head to toe. And that's helping, again, with that mindfulness as well. So just being aware of your body. Reflect, right? This can kind of go with journaling, but sometimes if you're not a writer or you don't want to take that time, just reflecting on things. So taking time to actually discern and move through those past events. Dance like no one is watching. And I put this instead of be active because it just makes me smile, and humor is a great way to combat stress in a positive way. But be active, and that can look any way you need it to, right? You need to choose activities you're going to enjoy. I remember one time my friend told me, gosh, I hate running and I need to run, but it just brings me no joy, right? So then why are we doing it, right? Choose another activity that can bring you joy, that can bring you fulfillment. It doesn't have to be the going to the gym 5 times a week and running a mile every day. Choose an activity that you enjoy, and then be realistic as well with your activities, right? Don't start saying, oh, I'm going to go do this and this and this and this and this, because that's going to add stress, because then you're going to be like, oh, I'm not able to get to all those things. And then too, just letting loose is another part of this dance like no one is watching. Seeking out professional help is so important. If you have the opportunity to participate in any sort of therapy or group work, it's just such a great tool to help with practicing that mindfulness, that self-awareness. And really, it's kind of that self-care appointment, right? You kind of get to take that chunk of time to be with somebody who is trained to kind of help you through what you're feeling. Don't be afraid to share your joys and successes with people that you love. That's going to really help with managing stress. Laughter is the best medicine. So watch a funny movie or a funny TV show, read a funny book, just anything that makes you laugh, right? Let that surround you. And then utilize your resources. There are so many resources out in the world, especially with the internet. And then also community resources, especially I feel like after COVID, there's so much more focus on our mental health. So there's just so many rich resources out there to help us with managing this stress. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the effects of stress, the negative effects of stress, but what are the benefits of managing our stress or reducing our stressors, right? We might see improvements in our daily lives. So just everyday things just seem a little bit easier, or we might have a little more energy. We might see improvements with relationships. We're not as grumpy or grouchy or irritated with our loved ones or our friends. We'll be able to fill our cup. And this is helpful for ourselves personally, but then also for other people, because if our cup is filled, we're able to give more energy to ourselves to kind of work through our stresses and to kind of address those, but also we're able to maybe have a little bit more energy to help others as well, which then also kind of has a positive impact on us. We'll notice more energy and increased productivity. We'll notice better management of illness and diseases, right? So we're not aggravating things, we're actually kind of managing. A lot of those interventions for chronic diseases, especially heart disease and respiratory illnesses, is reduce stress, reduce stress, reduce stress, because stress is aggravating all those things. And so we might definitely see better management or improvement. Improved physical, emotional, and mental health. We'll notice improved self-awareness because a lot of that coping with stress in a positive way is being self-aware. And then there's just so much more, so many more things. But bottom line is that chronic stress is so detrimental to our physical and our emotional and our mental health. But being able to address that, we can actually start to reverse those or block those negative effects. So on the next slide here, I have some available resources that I found online kind of through my research for this webinar. The first one is My Health Finder. And that one I really want to highlight because that kind of goes through all sorts of different chronic illnesses and diseases, gives you resources on how to address those, how to cope with things. So super great resource. The one that the link on the bottom is so like the sublink there is what a resource that I used for this presentation and had so much rich information. And then just other credible resources that are out there that can help with managing stress or giving you tools. The last one on the list is the 988 Lifeline, and that is actually the crisis hotline, so 988. And that is a really great number just to have, kind of like 911, just in your back pocket. But that's a great tool to use if you are in crisis or somebody you know is in crisis. You can give them that number. They can also go to this link and chat with somebody, like text them instead of actually having to talk with them on the phone. So just if you're feeling in crisis, there are immediate resources for you. You don't have to wait to get into a doctor. There's something immediately available for you. And then they'll help you kind of get through that process. Okay. So we are at our end here. And before we go, these are the next upcoming events that we have for our wellness webinars. Our next free virtual presentation is going to be March 26th. And it's going to be about GLP-1 medications. And my coworker, Caitlin Snyder, will be giving that presentation. And she is a registered dietitian and diabetes educator.
All right. Awesome. Thanks, Crystal. Great presentation. We really appreciate you doing this and you taking the time there. I love the Snickers reference, the little fun size Snickers. And I have not done the stress screening, so that'll be really interesting to see what my score is. There was one question in the Q&A about this recording. It will be sent out to you via email probably in the next week or so. If you don't get it in a week, feel free to just shoot us an email. We're happy to make sure it gets to you, but in the next week or so, we will send out that email with all the links and resources that Crystal shared as well. So otherwise, we are all done for the day. Well, Crystal and I will both hang out for a few minutes if you have any residual questions for Crystal, but otherwise, thanks so much, and thanks for being here today.
Thank you, everybody.